Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask if you could find your seat. We'd like to begin our program. Each year we have the opportunity to hear from, yeah, I'm speaking now. I need a gavel. When I was a young mayor, I had a gavel. I don't have my gavel anymore. Each year we have an opportunity to hear from economic development professionals, people involved in economic development across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we think it's really a good time to evaluate how Virginia is doing and actually provide a report card on how Virginia is doing. We heard from Mark this morning and gave an overview of the economy of the nation and Virginia is improving. Regions are now beginning to grow. We're working our way back from the recession. You heard from 4 CEOs that run major enterprises about the features and benefits of doing business in Virginia. And we're going to continue talking about how we position Virginia for growth in every region of the Commonwealth. And while the official bios are in your book, and Chris will introduce them in a few minutes, I'm really delighted that Evan Feynman and Debbie Wynn and Stephen Murray are here. All are partners with the business community throughout the Commonwealth, and Debbie leading many, many initiatives, just pure business leadership, helping us to grow and prosper and working with government officials. And you'll hear more about that as well. I do want to thank McGuire Woods and McGuire Woods Consulting for their support of the Blueprint Virginia initiative. They were our sponsoring Blueprint Virginia law firm when we went around the state and heard from over 6,000 business leaders and put forward our Blueprint Virginia 2025. Presented it actually a year ago to Governor-elect Ralph Northam, and we've worked constructively with his administration this year on so many fronts in improving our national rankings, and the governor will be here at lunch to talk more about that. We've asked Chris Lloyd, and he's agreed to chair our business industry climate on an ongoing basis, focusing on how the economy is doing. And I'm just so delighted that Chris is back. He runs as Senior Vice President, Director of Infrastructure and Economic Development for McGuire Woods. So please join me in welcoming the panel and thanking Chris Lloyd for his leadership. Chris?
Right. Thanks so much, Barry, for that kind introduction. And again, on behalf of McGuire Woods Law Firm, and McGuire Woods Consulting, it's really my honor to be here this morning to kick off this panel to talk about ways to grow the economy in every corner of Virginia. And again, I want to say thanks to all of you as business leaders for making this trip to Williamsburg to hear about some of the future directions of Virginia's economy. Before I introduce this distinguished panel, however, let's take a step back and look at the extraordinary year we have experienced in the Commonwealth and some of our recent economic successes. That is probably best accomplished by reviewing a few, quote unquote, I would say you do quotes like this, but you couldn't see this arm. So a few big numbers that probably are familiar to everyone here. First number, of course, is 25,000. Yep, we couldn't go but too far this morning without mentioning the number of jobs that the new Amazon headquarters will bring to the state. And as Chris Schmurr will review just after this panel, the total impact on the Commonwealth is even bigger. $3 billion would be the next number. The single largest capital investment in the state's history was announced on a very hot August morning by Micron with the expansion of its Manassas semiconductor facility. And billions more are being invested around the state by other companies in a variety of industries. And I do mean in every corner of the state. 2.9%. Yes, our unemployment rate in Virginia really is that low. A record 4.027 million Virginians are now employed and working to grow the Virginia economy. And just last week, Virginia moved up to 4th on the Forbes list of best states to do business. And all I can say is watch out, North Carolina, we're coming for you. There's no doubt we are certainly headed in the right direction, and that's good to be able to say. But as I've noted the past 2 years in this exact same spot, these and similar headlines can mask some of the other stark realities of the Virginia economy. Despite being in the 9th year of our economic recovery, the state still faces fiscal challenges, and we lag other states in some key measures that would point to future economic prosperity and resiliency. The goal of today's panel is to highlight some areas where we as a state, led by the business community, need to focus our energies to fully regain our competitive edge, meet the governor's call to again be the #1 state for business, and ensure that when the next economic downturn comes, and as Mark Vintner noted this morning, it's coming. We just don't know when. We will have done everything we can to promote economic resiliency and have made investments during this time of general economic prosperity that will have positive returns for many decades to come. Each of our speakers today will tackle some of those areas of opportunity and outline both the challenges and the current thinking on how to build sustainable models for the future. Investments in these areas at this time are what are needed to truly transform Virginia's economy. First, if the future of Virginia's economy is really tied to data, there are few more important needs than linking together all of Virginia to the rest of the world. That's why we're starting with Evan Feinman this morning, who, in addition to heading the economic revitalization efforts of the Tobacco Commission, has been appointed the state's chief broadband advisor. Although the state has made great strides in the last decade, nearly 1 million Virginians still lack access to the internet at speeds deemed minimally acceptable or lack access entirely. But broadband is not just about more about than just reliable and safe and fast access. The goal of universal access is not so that Virginians can binge watch the latest season of Game of Thrones, but instead, it's about taking those technology assets as the home of the world's largest cluster of data centers, the new transoceanic and transcontinental cables that are under construction that link Virginia to the world, and using those tools to promote job creation and enhance our state's economic competitiveness. Following Evan will be Dubby Wynn, who is chairman of the Virginia Growth and Opportunity Board, also known as Go Virginia. He will be talking, and over the past year, Go Virginia has played a leading role in laying the foundation to transform the Virginia economy. But as that initiative enters its next chapter, Dubby will use today's panel to talk about how Go Virginia, through you, Virginia's business community, can advance initiatives to address the talent pipeline, develop new sites for economic growth, support entrepreneurship, and scale up existing companies. We'll end today with Stephen Murray, who, if you don't know who he is, you clearly have been living under a rock for the past year. He's, of course, the head of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, part of the team who, along with Governor Northam and Secretary Ball, are leading the state's economic development activities in many new and exciting directions. Let me also take this time, as did Barry, to thank Stephen for being a valuable partner to the Virginia Chamber's Business Climate Working Group. Stephen will put into context how investments in site development and talent will drive the future of economic growth all across Virginia. Each speaker this morning will spend about 8 to 10 minutes on each of these topics, and then I will ask several questions of the group and the members individually. Thanks again, and Evan, let's go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I'd like to first thank the Chamber. This is a really great event every year. I always enjoy coming. I always learn a lot. I know it feels a little bit with the overflow room like we've outgrown the Williamsburg Lodge, but I'd encourage you to stay here. It's just a great venue. I wear two hats. I wear either or both of them, spending a lot of time thinking about how we might be able to grow and in fact continue the across-the-board growth that Mark actually detailed earlier today, making sure that we're focused intently on bringing everyone along as Virginia grows. It's a very common distinction to say, well, there's the Crescent and then there's the rest of Virginia, which is a nice shorthand, but actually misses a lot of the bright spots out in rural Virginia, and then also tends to gloss over some of the challenges that still exist in Crescent communities. And so I'd encourage everybody to think of it more as a spectrum than it is a divide. I am first the director of the, there we go, the director of the Tobacco Region Revitalization Commission, colloquially the Tobacco Commission. I don't sell cigarettes. Unlike Howard, or pot, to be clear. Though, you know, that's a laugh line today. In the next decade, people are going to be laughing to the bank. The Tobacco Commission was created almost 20 years ago. It's made up of a really remarkable board of legislative leaders, citizen leaders, members of the governor's cabinet. And over the course of that 20 years, it has been an incredibly important source of capital for the green and the brown portions of the state, roughly sort of half of rural Virginia, about a third of Virginia's land area, 40 cities and counties. That march has been really important, and the Commission has done a variety of different work over the course of its history, and today it really focuses on three areas. First, workforce development, both buying down the cost of credential attainment for citizens who live in or attend institutions within that footprint. Additionally, supplying capital to post-secondary institutions in that footprint who might otherwise have to very carefully hoard state appropriations over a period of many years before standing up, for example, a nursing program or an IT program that's very capital intensive when you talk about the equipment that you need to really get that done. We also invest in infrastructure, so tens of millions of dollars in sites, shell buildings, the utilities that support them, water, sewer, gas, electrical. We've also deployed over $130 million in broadband. That most recently included an $11 million investment that connected over 31,000 homes and businesses across southern and southwest Virginia. That should be noted as an incredibly efficient use of government funds relative to what we got. That was well below the national average, and we think that's a model we can continue along. And then finally, we do direct corporate attraction. That's sort of what people classically think of when they think of economic development, right? We go and try to interface with companies, talk to them about how strong their opportunities are in the region of Virginia that we serve, and then we offer some capital to help ease their transition into the region, whether that's a grant, a loan, or some combination of both. I am also the governor's chief broadband officer. To be clear, you know, broadband is infrastructure. It's not an intrinsic good. It's a good that allows the creation of other real goods, jobs, education, opportunity. But the two roles are really complementary, because the fact of the matter is, and it's the reason the Tobacco Commission took such a leadership role, you know, again, investing over $130 million in rural broadband deployment, you simply can't get there. You can't grow the economy of rural Virginia or anywhere without good access to broadband. Universal broadband access is Governor Northam's business, or vision and business. We are going to get in no more than 10 years, and I should be clear that Governor Northam, when he says functionally universal broadband access in 10 years, if we close in on the finish line, we get to year 10, and in the last day of that year we have everybody connected, pretty sure the governor's going to give me a D- on that. His goal, his vision is universal broadband in no more than 10 years. So we're going to work to bring that date at which we can say we've got everybody hooked up much closer than we can. We're going to be releasing the plan that will detail that in the very near future. It's undergoing some edits and revisions. It's largely been written, but we're looking for the right opportunity to share it with everyone, and we want to make sure that it is as tight as we can possibly make it. One of the things that I want to be clear about is that universal broadband coverage is an economic necessity. We simply cannot properly leverage all the assets that we have in Virginia if we don't have it. It is a good investment. It's positive ROI. You immediately gain economic benefits, whether it's property value benefits, whether it's business attraction benefits, whether it's workforce development benefits, if you bring broadband to rural communities. It is also a social and political demand. For those of you who are in elected office, I suspect you hear quite frequently from your constituents about the need for either access to broadband or better broadband. And finally, this is a moral necessity. The fact of the matter is, children who are born into communities where they don't have access to broadband at home do not do as well, correcting for all other variables, as they would if they were somewhere where they had broadband at home. We got 4 of the top 10 school districts in the Commonwealth in Southwest Virginia. Not a lot of folks know that. The post-secondary numbers are not as strong as they could be. A huge portion of that is broadband availability. So I've been saying that for a while. Governor Northam said, all right, well, if you're going to pound this many podiums, you might as well try to get across the finish line on it. So we're going to work with all the stakeholders, and we're going to develop and refine ideas. And this first plan that's going to come out in the next couple of weeks is the first iteration of what's ultimately going to be a complex and multi-party effort to ensure that we can get smart, use a lot of leverage, come up with some new policy ideas, and get to that finish line. Ultimately, rural economic growth is a complex problem. There isn't a single way to get this done. We've got to make sure that when you've got a small and dispersed population, that you've got the right workforce training programs and the right workforce profile. You've got to have a nimble workforce training program because you don't know what opportunity is going to come around the corner. And you got to keep those essentially level. The fact of the matter is, if either job attraction or workforce development gets out ahead of one another, if you've got more job openings than you have trained workforce to meet, then you're going to hurt the businesses that you've attracted to your region. And if you do a heck of a lot more workforce training than you have job opportunities, what you're doing is you're funding the departure of talent from your region. So it's very important that you keep those two things level. But the fact of the matter is it's worth doing. We've got incredible talent and assets in communities all across Virginia. And no challenge this big gets turned around overnight. But if we focus on making serious investments and we're targeted in those investments, we get smart about what we're doing and how we're doing it, we can make sure that we can get across the finish line. So workforce development. You can't just do the same thing everywhere. I get frustrated when I hear somebody say, well, we've got an incubator, we got some computers, and we're going to be the next Silicon Valley. Well, Silicon Valley is already Silicon Valley, and there are already a couple of next Silicon Valleys. What you need to figure out is, what do you do better than somebody else, or what could you do better? That competitive advantage and seizing an opportunity is what allows communities to succeed, and communities can be very broadly drawn. It can be a whole region. You think about, for example, the Danville region, which is a broad area across south central Virginia, made a decision many years ago to invest very seriously in advanced manufacturing workforce training. It is now, and this is a commonly misused term, but it's truly applicable here, the world-class advanced manufacturing training center in North America, and I would argue in the Western world. I'm running out of time, so we're going to skip through a few things. But we need to think seriously about civic leadership. We absolutely need more folks in our region coming back to home. And we absolutely need to be sure that we're ready for the changes that are coming in the economy. If you look at the intersection of intelligent software and advanced robotics, the fact of the matter is that is going to happen soon. It is going to disrupt a lot more industries than people think it will. This will not be purely a manufacturing-focused event. And if we're not ready to be nimble and address those challenges, not just in rural Virginia, but in all of Virginia, that's going to be a huge and disruptive challenge for us. Finally, to close, this is my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And for those of you who live in the Crescent, as I do, I love living in Richmond, come and visit. Take a day trip, spend some time, spend a weekend in Farmville, Stanton, Abingdon, St. Paul, Halifax. And while you're there, spend some money. Thanks.
Well, good morning. Barry, where are you? Congratulations. What you've done with this chamber over the last bunch of years is really remarkable. And it's certainly inured to the benefit of all of us because of what he's done here. So thank you for that. Okay, we're going to dig right in here, if I can figure out how to advance this. That obviously didn't work. Well, okay, I tried it, didn't work. There we go. Okay, I'm going to blow through these slides pretty quickly, and I'm going to emphasize, if there's one thing you remembered from today, in my opinion, the single most important thing we need to do is develop talent pipelines. And I use the word talent, not workforce, deliberately, and you'll see why as we go through this. So what is Go Virginia? Most of you know by now. It is a bipartisan, business-led. Many of you have been involved in supporting this. It is game-changing because we have the state incentivizing economic activity, serious economic activity, in every region of the state. We're incentivizing it, and we're incentivizing collaboration. And it's a partnership between business, education, local government. That's great. Now, the purpose statement, create more and higher paying jobs. Why higher paying jobs? Higher paying jobs create lower paying jobs. The opposite is not true. It is very worthy to find jobs for people that are unemployed. And of course we should be doing that. But if we're really serious about it, a rising tide floats all boats, including those of us that are pretty sociocentric and worry about folks that can fall between the cracks. A robust economy is the key to that. Now, the difference in what we're doing, we spent a lot of time with Stephen, and we're collaborating a lot. We are the regional focus of what Stephen is doing statewide. And we collaborate on a lot of stuff, as you'll hear in just a couple of minutes. So here's what we've done. So far, we've put about $11 million out, 34 projects. You'll hear in a minute what it is. We've leveraged $19 million back. It requires 2 or more localities. We don't give any grant unless 2 or more localities are sponsoring it, and they must put up at least 20% of the funds. Now, did I go the wrong way? There we go. So to Chris's point a minute ago, so everything feels good now in Virginia, right? The economy is great. And you heard a lot of comments before about how we're recession-proof in a lot of areas, and a lot of good things are going on. Here's the data. It's not as good as you think. If you look at this slide, and I'll just focus on the average, on the right-hand side, one region over the last 10 years has performed at national average growth. One region. And it's Charlottesville, a relatively small community that has outsized impact from the University of Virginia. This is real. Now, in the last year or so, we're accelerating, starting to get at national average. National average is not what we seek in Virginia. Is anybody willing to accept national average performance? I don't think so. And we have a little bit of a disconnect in this data, and Forbes has us at number 4. Obviously, there's different data that is being considered. Now, here are the ways we're trying to get at this. These are the priority clusters. Now, 3 of these areas, Steve and I have talked about 4 leading indicators for the future of the economy. Nobody talks about it much. We look backwards. The trajectory of your talent, the trajectory of startups, the trajectory of scaled up companies, and the density of your clusters will predict how you're going to do in the future. We ought to be monitoring that, obviously, on a robust basis in every region, particularized to that region. So let me unpack these a bit for each of you. Talent pipeline. We're meeting with 40 of our smartest next generation people in Hampton Roads on Monday, and we're saying it's time for you to step up and start leading. And here are the things we're going to be talking about, these exact same things. And by the way, this is not a civic endeavor for you. You should get some personal satisfaction. You may have an interest aside, but some of this should rub off in your business. Does any one of us in a business not think that talent is the #1 ingredient for our future success? I was raised in a company that said, get great talent, great leaders, and get out of the way. And I believe that. And I think given this rising tide, we haven't spent as much time on this subject as we'd like. Low unemployment, 14,000 migration. We don't have data, good data. We've got a lot of statistical projections. We don't have good data from the CEOs saying, what are the highest priorities that you need to fill now and that you see needing for future growth in the foreseeable future? Every region should have that profile. We're encouraging our regions to get that data. We're doing it right now in Hampton Roads. We're spending $150,000 through our community foundation. We'll have that data. And we're going to start targeting our talent pipelines against that data. It's not going to be a shotgun blast. We're going to focus. And so I could go on and on here. There is a prototypical approach that will work here. It's not rocket science. It's hard work. The hardest part is putting in a front end that can get more people interested in going through the credentialing and degrees who are willing to stay in this state and take the jobs. And we're not spending any effort on that. Individual companies are, but by and large, we're not doing this systematically. Very important. Site development, no sites. This is for growth, of course, for new companies coming in. Barry, you may be, I don't know who's going to be. Are you going to be talking about this, Stephen, in a minute on sites? So I won't do much on this. We're collaborating with them. We're now systematically getting each region to survey, figure out what they've got, inventory it, figure out what it takes to get up to tier 4s and 5s so that we actually have a seat at the table. We were shocked when we got into this to find that no such inventory existed. And we are the only state in the Southeast that missed the automotive aerospace expansion of the last 20 years because we didn't have sites. Hard to imagine. How could that happen? Next, entrepreneurship. Virginia ranks 22nd out of our 25th largest states in startup activity. You get that? In our research, 80% of the intellectual property coming out of our public universities is licensed to out-of-state companies. You think we got a little bit of a disconnect here? We do. It's nobody's fault, by the way. This is a function of the service component of serving the federal government. But it's going to take some really important efforts. And oh, by the way, talent has a lot to do with entrepreneurship and what they see in terms of startup and all of those things that make them want to come and stay here. Scale-ups. You know, this is a conundrum for us. We know that you pick the percentage, 50 to 70% of job growth occurs in small and mid-sized companies. Everybody says the same thing. We have tried for the last 3 years and there are no organized programs in the state to do this. Okay, you'd say, well, 50 to 70%, why aren't there more? They just aren't. We have been trying in Hampton, and this may be the reason, we've been trying in Hampton Roads and spent quite a bit of money. We can't get, and I know there's a reason to do this, local EDOs in performing their business retention and expansion function to identify companies that we can help to do that. And we will pay 75% of the cost of doing it. So there's some disconnect here that we can't quite figure out, but obviously we've got to figure out a way to get at that. Okay, just to summarize, talent pipeline, you got to have a front end. We've got to have far more partnering between business and higher ed. Higher ed's got to move out of silos. The days of simply saying, my job is only to produce a degree or a credential are gone. These students and families that are paying this money need more engagement to find the credentials they need to have lifelong employment. Can you imagine going to college today and not getting exposed to computer science? A lot of people are. Not the smart ones. The smart ones know that they better have that or they're not going to have the skill sets as it unfolds. So the headline, you can see I'm passionate about this subject, and I'm going to end a little early, but the headline for me is talent pipelines in every region targeted to the particulars of that region where it's needed the most. You heard about Newport-Newship. Newport-Newship is doing a sensational job. And you want to study something about how to do all of this, they're really doing it well. Obviously, it'll go well in Amazon in Northern Virginia. But all the rest of the state says, you've done Amazon, now how about us? And this is what we're encouraging business leaders in every region to take over. And there is personal benefit to them in figuring out for their own company how to get these talent pipelines, whether it's directly impactful to them. The prototypical approaches are the same. So that's our message. Thank you.
Well, what an exciting day to be in the Commonwealth of Virginia. As I was sitting here getting ready to walk up, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with Barry Duvall a little over 2 years ago when I was thinking about moving back to Virginia to take over VDP. And we talked about what would be possible if the business leadership could come together with the Chamber and the Commonwealth and the Governor and the General Assembly and all work together to position Virginia for a brighter economic future. Well, make no mistake, we are making progress in Virginia. Let's also remember that there's a lot more work to be done. I want to talk a little bit about that today. First of all, going back a year, we got together with business leaders, with local and regional economic development leaders, with the Chamber, with Go Virginia, with the Port of Virginia, with the Virginia Economic Developers Association and others last year to craft a bold vision for the future of the Commonwealth, a vision that would take into account not just our historical economic drivers, but the potential for growth across Virginia. As we put together that vision, we thought about the strengths that we have in Virginia and how we could leverage those strengths. We're top 10 for educational attainment in America, in fact, almost in the top 5. We're the best state for higher education in the country, according to Smart Asset, with amazing higher education institutions across the Commonwealth. Top 10 for public schools. When we got into the final 20 for the Amazon project, we had the best public schools of any remaining region in that competition. We have a great location in the Mid-Atlantic area, the centroid, almost the exact centroid of the East Coast talent pool, with a great place to draw talent from the Northeast and the Southeast, a natural deep water port, and a location next to Washington, D.C. We have low state and local tax burdens for existing firms in Virginia. We have, according to Forbes, coming out just a few days ago, the best regulatory environment in the United States. We also have, in my view, one of the most advanced ports in the world. And if you think about the Port of Virginia as just about containers, it's about a lot more than that. In just the last few years, the port has been involved in 144 economic development announcements in Virginia, 15,000 new jobs from those announcements, $3.7 billion in new capital investment just from port-related projects over the last few years. Hats off to John Reinhardt and his team for the great work that they're doing. We also have exceptional airport and spaceport infrastructure, with the spaceport on the Eastern Shore, beautiful airports across the Commonwealth, and of course the amazing Dulles and Reagan airports in Northern Virginia. And also a diverse array of high-quality employers. I'm blown away by the companies that are represented in this Commonwealth and in this room today. I've had an opportunity to visit every region of Virginia at least 6 times, if not a dozen, and the thing that blows me away every time is the amazing companies. Every major industry sector building world-class products, delivering world-class services with some of the best companies in the world. It's just outstanding. And finally, we also have dozens of federal laboratories in the Commonwealth of Virginia that we've drawn on for those assets. So as we were putting together that plan last year, we talked about where we could go in the future. What were our aspirations? And it ultimately came down to 5 key things, 5 transformational goals. Positioning Virginia to be one of the top 5 to 10 states in the country in terms of growth, not just growth in jobs, but growth in the quality of jobs and median earned income. Second, and perhaps most radical as a state, is to work to position every region of the Commonwealth to grow, that every region would participate in that growth. Third, getting back to being the best state for business in the country, not just in reality, but in perception as well. Fourth, and able to accomplish all those things, to build VDP back into being one of the very best state economic development organizations in the country. And fifth, to do that all in a great spirit of collaboration, really coming from the kind of collaborative leadership that Barry and his team have provided at the Chamber of Commerce. So let me give you a little update on where we're at with each of those. First of all, the growth goal. We are seeing with the sequestration sort of a little bit more behind us. The last 5 years, we were ranked 30th for total employment. We're expected to be 18th in the next 5 years. This is according to Moody's forecast. Gross state product, sort of the size of the total economy, 38th the last 5 years, expected to be 19th. So the outlook is getting better, but it's not nearly where it needs to be. In fact, we need to add roughly 20 to 25,000 additional jobs per year over the current baseline to get into the top 10. That's why economic development is so important. Second, and I think probably what will ultimately be our most challenging goal, is positioning every region of the Commonwealth to grow. Let me put this in context a little bit. If you look at the country, the last 5 years, this is employment growth, not population growth. What you see is you look at every state, you have a mix of growing areas and areas in decline. In the very same states, some of the fastest growing states in the country. Look at Texas, one of the fastest growing states, huge swaths of Texas losing jobs over the last 5 years. Last year, I showed you a slide looking at the Commonwealth of Virginia in particular. The last 10 years, you saw almost half of the regions in Virginia lost employment over that 10-year period, not more recently. We're doing a lot better now. The last 5 years, looking a lot better, but still a few regions in decline. By the way, this is not in conflict with the earlier presentation. If you look at just this year, we have almost every region is actually in growth. We want to sort of measure this over time. If you look at the forecast the next 5 years, again, going from Moody's, kind of similar. You have most of Virginia growing, but we still have areas that aren't yet participating in that growth. So there's a lot more work left to do. Let me move to the business climate rankings. We talked about getting back to the top. 10 years ago, Virginia was regularly ranked the best state for business in America. We started to fall a bit after 2010, as we talked about last year. Oops, sorry. We fell kind of bottoming out around 2015 at number 11. We've since come up several spots. You've heard about some of them. With CNBC was probably the biggest move this year, Forbes after that. What's particularly heartening to me is if you look back over time, 10 years ago, Virginia ranked ahead of North Carolina and Georgia. We then sort of fell below them. The last year, this year in 2018, North Carolina and Georgia both falling a little bit, Virginia making a move forward. So we are getting in the direction we want to go in. When we talk about making VEDP a much more effective state economic development organization, I'm so proud of the work of our teams over the last year. We implemented substantially all of the JLARC recommendations. We generated a 44% increase in VDP-generated leads last year. We're running 22% higher this year over last year. We also have what I think is now the best European office of any state in the United States. We're making good progress, but again, with more work left to be done. And finally, that collaboration goal. What an incredible collaborative spirit that we've been able to cultivate, not just us, but all the other folks that are involved, and not just the core groups, but going from the governor and his team on down. We are working now closely with trade associations, with the Northern Virginia Technology Council, the Port, and so many others across the Commonwealth of Virginia to drive growth in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I also want to give great credit to the General Assembly. Last year, 3 key priorities got funded, not only in the Blueprint Plan, but also in VDP's growth strategy for Virginia. Custom workforce program we're going to be launching in the spring with the Virginia Community College System. A site development effort. Again, more needs to be done, but it's going in the right direction. And for the first time in several years, we're marketing Virginia as a great place for business, and that's one of the things that's going to help our rankings to move back up. We also had a great year for business development. It would be easy to stand up here and talk about Amazon and Micron, but what I want you to know is that we've had a great year across Virginia. I checked the numbers either yesterday or the day before. If we took Amazon and Micron completely out, we're still running well ahead of our goals for the year. It's been a great year in Virginia. Corporate headquarters moving to the Commonwealth with Framatome, with Arconic, with Gerber, big manufacturing projects across the Commonwealth. Of course, Amazon being the big headliner, and the big opportunity that project really represents beyond the direct impact on jobs and innovation is all about the tech talent pipeline that Debbie talked about. I mean, that really is, to me, the biggest story coming out of the Amazon project is that as a result of that project, the Commonwealth, with the governor's leadership, with the General Assembly support, is going to be more than doubling our tech talent pipeline, not just in Northern Virginia, but at public colleges and universities across the Commonwealth. So where do we go from here? Because I think it's really important to acknowledge that while there's clearly some forward progress and some good things to think about what's been happening this year, there's definitely more to be done. First of all, I just want to heartily endorse Evan Feynman's presentation and the governor's leadership on broadband. That is one of the most important things to help position every region of the Commonwealth to participate in the growth of the Commonwealth. Secondly, I want to give great credit to Go Virginia and Debbie Wynn and others that are involved in that effort, Ben Davenport and others, for the work that they're doing to prioritize site development. We've been working together over the last year. We're going to lay out, Virginia, I will tell you, we are behind. We're behind North Carolina, we're behind South Carolina, we're behind Georgia and Tennessee in site development, and it is, in fact, the most common reason that we've lost manufacturing projects in Virginia the last 5 to 10 years. But we are catching up. We're going to go from being maybe not quite last place, but let's say in the 3rd tier, to laying out a vision of what it would take to really position Virginia to grow from a site preparedness perspective. Additionally, we need to lead the nation when it comes to connecting people to education and good jobs. Building on the great work that Megan Healy and others are doing in the administration, that's a big opportunity as well. We're going to create America's best custom workforce recruitment and training program, working in partnership with the Virginia Community College System and with the financial support we got from the state last year, or going into this year rather. We've also got to keep expanding the supply of sub-baccalaureate credentials, things like machinists and electricians and so forth. These are critical occupations for the Commonwealth. It's not just about the 4-year degrees. Those are critical as well, and building on the Fast Forward program will be critical there. Finally, the last 5, cultivating technology centers in smaller metros and rural regions. You heard today from CGI about their great facility in Lebanon and the impact that that facility has made for the Commonwealth. Now imagine something like CGI, like that facility in Lebanon, in every region of the rural horseshoe in our smaller metros across Virginia. That is what we have in mind. Statewide broadband is going to help enable that, as will the Tech Talent Pipeline Initiative. We also need to do more in Virginia with trade. We have the best trade development team in the country, but our trade statistics, the actual level of activity is well below average. We're going to be laying out a strategic plan to take that to the top 10. We need to build our business retention and expansion program. Our existing companies are going to be the source of most of our growth in the future. We need to do a better job of taking care of them. We need to continue to build that statewide marketing program. We've gotten a good start, but there's more left to do. And finally, at the right time, we need to modernize Virginia's tax code to position the Commonwealth for growth. If you think about all these things we've talked about today, the great news is that there are a lot of good things happening in economic development in the Commonwealth. We have a great deal of momentum, and that is thanks to the business leadership, the public leadership, everyone coming together to position Virginia for a brighter economic future. Last year actually concluded with this same slide, and I wanted to show it again because these are the kind of headlines we envision seeing in a few years. Boy, they really seem like they're getting closer and closer to being true. Thank you very much.
Thanks to everybody on the panel for, I think, some very enlightening discussion of some of the opportunities for moving Virginia's future forward. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask some individual questions and then some group questions as well of the panel here. And we'll start with Evan. Evan, you said you don't like the term, the rural-urban divide, and I think that's appropriate. And I think there are many success stories around Virginia and some rural communities. What did they do to be successful? And what were those seeds that can be planted in other communities to see growth there?
Sure. So, as I said before, it'd be a lot easier if there were some single model that you could apply and just drop a cookie cutter solution over and over again. The communities that have been successful have had a couple of different elements to them. The first has been a civic and political leadership group that was willing to go a little out on a limb and make some long-term investments. We have a lot of incentives in local and regional government to look for quick wins, try to ensure that given, whatever the length of your term is, or your realistic sort of grace period as a new hire in an economic development organization, trying to get quick wins. And there's value in that to get the ball rolling, but really what you got to do is chart a course, figure out what your region does better or could do better than comparably sized and positioned localities. And then start making investments with a recognition that it may take a long time for those investments to bear fruit. You look at the Spearhead Trails Initiative in St. Paul in Southwest Virginia. It would not occur to a lot of people that there exists a broad-moneyed, traveling ATV subculture in this country, two different trade magazines, but they've in fact invested significantly, and the commission has been a partner with them in that. And now you're seeing a new hotel going up, multiple new restaurants. The fact of the matter is that little town's booming. But it took a long time. It took patience, and it took the ability to weather those downturns, to spend money into something that was not yet bearing fruit. Similarly, investments that I described in the workforce development pipeline in Danville have been tremendous. You look at the cultural work that has been done along the Crooked Road or in Floyd County or in Bristol and Abingdon. What they're seeing is significant upticks in tourism, but it took a long time. I mean, building a Birthplace of Country Music Museum in Bristol was a leap. But now there's a new hotel going in. The economy there is trending upward. They're seeing significant tourism economies. But the fact of the matter is it's not the same everywhere. And so the first thing I would say is get a good leadership team together and then recognize that if you're not growing yet, it could be 7 to 10 years before you get there. But every day that you don't start down that path is a day that arrival point is that much farther in the future.
Great, thank you, Evan. Dubby, I'll turn to you next. Evan obviously talked about the importance of making long-term investments. What do you think? Go Virginia has some money, though it's limited. It's not an unlimited amount of money, particularly when you spread it statewide. How do you think the limited resources that are available to Go Virginia can be leveraged and targeted to get the best bang for the buck?
Yeah, well, as we said in the slide, we're already getting 2-to-1 return on it, which is pretty good to start with. That's cash and pretty quick. The second thing we're doing, and maybe the most important of all, what we're doing is priming the pump and creating trust where it did not exist for collaboration in regions. Chris and I have been on the phone talking to the chair and CEOs with Ben Davenport, our vice chair, and all of them are citing examples of how if Go Virginia didn't exist, this wouldn't have happened. Probably the most noticeable, two major things I'll just tell you. So I-81, everybody knows there's a transportation problem out there. The three Go Virginia councils have gotten together and talked about they need a solution, and they're talking about doing a solution like Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia did in terms of a tax increase that they would pick up and developing a solution to that. They all said that never would have happened a couple of years ago, even though it's an obvious thing to occur. Another example in my own hometown, many of you all, if you know Hampton Roads, know we have 17 jurisdictions. And we are generally as dysfunctional in 17 jurisdictions as any can be. They compete for everything. 17 of them are about to sign an MOU for regional economic development where they are going to agree on our most important clusters being collaborative, and they will not compete. That would never have happened if business had not been involved and we hadn't been doing this. So I would say to you, the money's important, and it's particularly important to get deep thinking and to illustrate how these things can be leveraged. Talent pipelines is a very good example, right? We don't have enough money to solve all of that. But if we start that process and get people energized there, great things will start to happen. So I think what we're doing, and as Chris knows, we've set a very high standard for approval of these things. Over 30 projects, we still are sitting on a fair amount of money. And the good news is the General Assembly has allowed us to keep it as non-reverting. So as these projects get better and better, and they are, we'll have more and more impact.
Great. Stephen, to save you the pain from having to tell this story to 900 different people in different conversations today, why don't you do, because I'm sure everyone's thinking it, why don't you discuss some of the key aspects of what it took to win the Amazon project? And particularly some of the details and the breakdown of the investments in transportation and K-12 and higher education that have not just corporate specific benefit, but the region and the whole Commonwealth.
Sure. Well, I think there were really three big things. I think the first thing is that there was an incredible team. Many of you that are familiar with Northern Virginia know that the localities don't usually work together on economic development. And for this particular project, they made a collective decision to come together early on, Fairfax, Loudoun, Alexandria, and Arlington, to put together one world-class regional proposal. That made a big difference. But in addition to our local partners, the governor's personal engagement, I've been disappointed this hasn't gotten out, but the governor personally met with every member of the Amazon site selection team and was super engaged throughout the process. I forget how many people are on the cabinet, but I think roughly half the cabinet was directly engaged, especially Secretary Lane, Secretary Ball, Secretary Valentine. The General Assembly leadership, there's no way we would have gotten here without them. Chairman Jones, Senator Norman, Senator Ruff, Senator Hanger, and others. The higher education leadership. Virginia, more than any other state, led with higher education, which I think was a wonderful story. JBG Smith, there were so many other state and local partners. So it was an incredible team with more than 400 Virginians all pulling in the same direction, which to me was really special. The second thing, and this is really critical, is that when you think about winning this project was only partly about what happened in the last 14 months. In my view, it was largely about what's happened in Virginia over the last 15 to 20 years. The work to address regional transportation issues, the investments in helping build one of the best higher education systems in the country, one of the best systems of public education in the country, the metro funding solution more recently, and in particular, a stable tax and regulatory environment, and the fact that Virginia had been a great partner to Amazon for so long. Amazon today has close to 10,000 employees in the Commonwealth. They've invested almost $30 billion before HQ2. And then finally, I think the very distinctive approach that Virginia took. It was very clear early on that some other states were going to offer 5, 10, in some cases more than $10 billion for this. There was no way that we were going to recommend that, and even if we had, the General Assembly wouldn't have approved it. So we wanted to take more of a Virginia approach. And looking at what Amazon's experience had been in Seattle, it seemed to us that while they had done their job of bringing all this incredible wealth and new jobs and six-figure incomes and so forth, that perhaps the state and city had not quite done enough to keep up. And so we thought about how can we position the region and the Commonwealth not just for Amazon's future, but for the future of all of our tech companies. And I think leading with higher education, with transportation infrastructure, both the state and local level, and with affordable housing largely at the local level, I think really made us stand out. And as I said earlier, I think the biggest takeaway to me and the biggest benefit for the whole Commonwealth beyond all the new revenues is the fact that we're going to be, the Commonwealth, the General Assembly and the Governor are going to be investing in doubling our tech talent pipeline at all of the public colleges, universities, and community colleges across Virginia.
You made the point earlier, Stephen, that Virginia needs to add 25,000 jobs a year, which is another Amazon, each year, even just to get back above national average. So what does VEP do as for an encore? And
Yeah, well, first of all, when I say 25,000 a year, to be clear, we need to add 25,000 a year on top of the current growth expectations. So there's a big gap. And by the way, our current forecast, roughly in the 18 or so range. So get into the top 10. Again, the number moves around, but around 20 to 25,000 additional jobs per year. And it's basically the things that I highlighted and that Evan and Debbie have talked about. I mean, statewide broadband rollout. If we want every region of Virginia to grow, we have got to get that done. I mean, the states of the future that have statewide growth are going to have that as a core condition, critical. Couldn't agree more with Debbie. I mean, the single most important driver of our future growth will be the talent pipeline. In particular for those traded sector jobs like in technology and manufacturing and so forth, and then site development. I mean, if you think about the future manufacturing sector in Virginia, that is absolutely essential, particularly for the smaller metro areas and rural regions. So there are many other things, but I would certainly feel comfortable saying those are the top three.
Okay, thank you. Debbie, one of the themes that's run through all of our remarks has been the importance of business leadership. And obviously we have the premier business leaders of the Commonwealth assembled in this room. What are some of your thoughts on what they should be doing to advance some of these initiatives, whether it's Go Virginia or other things that Stephen and Evan have talked about?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, people work on those things that they have a passion about. Sometimes you're obligated because of business connections. That's hard. So in general, what we've tried to do is encourage people to find something you really care about. So if that happens, the lineup starts to really get good. The second thing, though, is, and this is a big deal, for too long, civic activities have been regarded with a civic standard of performance and not a business standard of performance. That's a losing proposition. Economic development is not a civic activity. It is absolutely pure business. And so dabbling, coming together 1 month or two, or doing a shelf report on a strategy and not getting any serious implementation is a losing strategy. And every leader knows that. So breaking those chains and starting to figure out where there's a match between your interest, what's important to you, what may be important to your company. We always think that the best alignment is if it's important to you and it can benefit your company because of some learning, some involvement of some of your employees, some utilization of marshaling of resources. Because the other thing, if you don't dabble, you got to marshal some resources so that you get some full-time effort if it's important. The other thing I would say, and this is the nature of leaders, leaders are not terribly interested in working on small tactical things. They're interested in having an impact, they're interested in working with people they highly regard, and they're interested in some new learning. If you can put those three things together and align the projects that are the most important in your community, there's no limit to what we can get done. And then the final thing I would say, we are not using the next generation of leadership anywhere near the way we ought to. I mean, it embarrasses me. I was doing the same thing. I'm 73. I was doing this when I was in my 30s, the exact same things. Well, where are the 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds? I mean, they're smarter than I ever was at that time. There's something that's a disconnect here. We're not asking, we're not stepping back, we're not supporting in the right way, and we need to fix that. Because if we fix that and get those leaders going, all these things we're talking about will really start to materialize.
Great, thank you. Evan, you spoke of some of the transformational investments the Tobacco Commission has made over time, and I think we're going to see a transformational announcement by the governor in the broadband plan coming up soon, if I had to guess. What are some other things you think the Commonwealth should be doing in communities that are experiencing that flat or stagnant growth that were highlighted in some of the maps that Stephen showed?
Sure. Well, so first is that kind of infrastructure investment. I think there's no doubt but that we absolutely must get universal broadband coverage. Business, even in the digital economy, still on some level happens in a place, right? So we do the site development work that's going on is critically important. There's simply, and it needs to be a wide variety of sites. You know, the mega sites are the big fun ones to talk about, but we also need a lot of smaller acreage sites, and they've still got to be high quality sites. We need to do a much better job, not just developing our workforce, but also analyzing and telling the story of the workforce that we've got. One of the things that the Commission's doing in partnership with APCO that I'm really proud of and that I'm excited about is a really deep dive workforce study. So right now, very frequently, what we can say is, well, here are the pipelines, here's how many graduates with X credential are coming out of our institutions, and as a separate and unrelated data point, here's how many people live within an hour's drive of this location. What we haven't been able to do is walk from what are the skills to what's the population. What we're doing in this study, and I hope it is successful and then is replicated across the Commonwealth, is a really deep statistical analysis of what are the talents of that workforce. So we'll be able to say there's 800 people who live within 10 minutes of this thing, and 400 of them can weld, and 300 of them are computer scientists, and 100 of them have PhDs or what have you. That'll be really exciting. I also think we need to do a lot better job of talent attraction and retention. If you look at a couple other states that are doing really interesting work, the state of Maine just rolled out a really remarkable program wherein, you know, Maine, probably a beautiful place, occurs for me as cold and uninviting, right? I mean, I'm not particularly interested in
unless
moving
you're
to Maine.
a lobster.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Apologies to the great state of Maine. So what they've done is they've said they have this sliding scale, but if you graduate with X degree or Y degree over a certain period of time, if you come to Maine, they're going to pay your student loans in a tax deduction or a refundable tax credit if you're not earning enough money. That will move the needle. We know that we've loaded up this entire generation with college debt that did not happen previously. That error can be undone moving forward, but the fact remains that that cohort that Debbie was talking about, a great reason they're not involved in civic leadership is because they're bearing a burden, often a mortgage-sized burden without a house, that prior generations didn't have to bear. So coming up with a way to see that as an opportunity to attract those folks is something that I think we could do in a big way. I'm optimistic that I will persuade the Commission to pilot a program that looks a little bit like that, actually at our meeting in January. And if that goes well, I would hope that the leadership in the General Assembly would see that and emulate that across all of our communities that are losing population.
That's great. I'm going to throw the next question out to the panel, but I'll start with Stephen to kick it off. And that is, Stephen, you laid out, particularly at the end of your presentation, a very aggressive agenda for achieving some of those headlines in 2022. What do you see as the biggest obstacles to achieving that?
I think back, Chris, to my first year in Virginia as I traveled across the Commonwealth, and again, as I said earlier, I mean, there's so many reasons to be proud of this great Commonwealth and all the assets that we have. But for anyone who's ever studied change management, the first rule of a successful change management is to create a sense of urgency. So the biggest challenge I think we have is actually that we could be a little complacent. There's so many things that are so good in the Commonwealth of Virginia that it's easy, I think, not to think as much about the things where we're trailing. But we are trailing in a number of things. Debbie hit on them. I hit on a few of them myself. If we can address those issues, we will really help position all of Virginia to grow. And that is what we're really excited about. And that's what I know everyone else in this room is working toward as well.
Evan, your thoughts?
Sure. I think you've had, 3 governors in a row now, at least, talk about the need for tax reform. We've had much of our legislature talk about the need for tax reform. And when you looked at Stephen's figures, you saw that we're a great tax state if you're an existing business, but we're a really crappy tax state if you're a startup business. We have to do something about that. And when you combine that and our lack of startup capital, it's just too tough to start a business in Virginia. And so there's 2 good ways to do that. One is to come up with a solution for those gross receipts taxes on new businesses that doesn't hurt our local governments. And the second is to find a way to make capital more available. If you look at, I spent a lot of time talking unflatteringly about other states, for which I apologize. If you look at sort of the Mississippis and Alabamas of the world, they're not frequently regarded as models. But as a result of that, one of the things that they had to do was find some source of capital. And so they looked at their state pension funds and said, you guys have to make a certain percentage of your investments as a pension fund in our states because it's going to be the only way we get some capital. Well, VRS is sitting on an awful lot of money. And I think if they hired a smart person to make a bunch of good bets on Virginia startups, it could go a long way.
Tubby, your thoughts?
I'm going to pivot a little bit. I think a key is innovation, startup, entrepreneurship. And obviously, there's entrepreneurship at every level of business. What I'm talking about is startup. And if you follow on Tuesday, we've got a meeting in Go Virginia. We've got a meeting of the VRIC board. And those slides that are going to be presented will be very interesting to you. We're proposing some major changes that would allow every region to have some resource and get started in taking a consultant's report we did to show how they stack up against comparable communities. Not all the urbans, comparable communities. None of our regions, not a one, is average compared to those peer groups. That is directly related to why companies will come here. Capital One in downtown Richmond got involved with that building, created that floor for innovation because they see a direct benefit in their workforce and having to do that. That's going to start, and all of you all can start being more involved in that. So I think if you add an innovation of the sort I'm talking about is not VEDP's responsibility. In fact, one of the disconnects is talent pipeline is not their responsibility, but they need to have much more of a say in that, much more of a say, or we've got a disconnect in it. The other thing, and then I'll just finish on this, workforce, we have $350 million coming into the state for what we call workforce. Most of that's federal money, and it is earmarked. There's almost no latitude in it. I was shocked to find out that Megan and Sarah and a couple of other people, there are 4 people in that office. 4 people. That's absurd. There should be a couple of dozen people in that office that are focused on working on supporting these regions, on these talent pipelines and so forth, if we're serious about it. They really haven't got the resource. And we, Stephen, some of us that are working, we need to work on that. We need to figure out how to help resource these things. They're very willing, they're very smart people, but they don't have the resources. Those are rounding errors. Another dozen people with some incentive, those are small dollars to really start get some of this stuff going. And again, back to my theme, it does take a full-time commitment of some people that wake up every morning trying to make this happen, or you will not get there.
Thank you. Stephen, Evan, Dubby, any closing comments y'all want to make in our remaining few minutes?
I would just say, again, how much I'm grateful for the role that the Chamber has played in bringing together all of us, all the local chambers, other groups across the Commonwealth. I mean, if you look at the things that Virginia needs to do to move forward, they're in Blueprint Virginia. When we worked on our plans, so many of those things were embraced by the Chamber. We're very grateful for that. And I think the sky's the limit for the Commonwealth.
I would just say, first of all, the effort to bring broadband to all Virginians is going to require everybody in this room. You've all been deputized. Frank, it's a society-wide benefit. It's going to need a society-wide push. And also keep your eye on a couple of new ideas coming out of the commission in the next year.
I'll give you one more that's related to what he's working on that almost nobody knows anything about. Loudoun County is the epicenter of the internet. 70% of the worldwide traffic in the internet goes through Loudoun County. Does everybody know that? There is a 4.5-mile density of data centers that has dark fiber that is open for other capacities that sits there. It's the most density of anywhere in the world. That allows you to add data analytics centers on top of it. Data centers, not many jobs. Data analytics, another whole ballgame. We now have at Virginia Beach these international pipelines, subsea fiber coming in. The combination of those two things ought to combine with what he's talking about to put this state on. We ought to be dominant on the East Coast in this, and we haven't got a strategy. We need one, because that's really an amazing asset for us to have an opportunity.
Well, I hope y'all will join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panel. And before we break for lunch, we thought it was important, since the Amazon announcement was made public, to let you all know that our foundation has been working on an economic impact analysis And we are very pleased to have about 10 minutes before we break for lunch for Dr. Chris Chmura to come and present what does this mean for the Commonwealth of Virginia from an economic impact perspective, what does it mean for Virginia from a fiscal impact perspective, and we're delighted that her company has been able to perform this for our foundation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chris Chmura.
Thank you very much. The second economist for the day and right before lunch, so I'll try to keep this brief for you. So we're looking at the economic impact of Amazon's major corporate headquarters in Virginia. And in keeping with the theme of the conference, clearly Amazon is going to play a role in transforming Virginia in the future. So what I'm first going to do is talk to you about what an economic impact is, sort of a primer 101 on economic impacts. Please don't run for the door. This won't be like your econ classes. And hopefully if you haven't taken econ before, you'll learn something about economics. Secondly, what does the Amazon expansion mean for the Commonwealth? Specifically, I'll talk about number of jobs, spending, and then tax revenues. And then thirdly, as most of you know, the major headquarters will be in Arlington County in National Landing. And so from that perspective, we're going to take a look at Arlington County and the impact there because the headquarters is mainly in Arlington County. So first, in terms of looking at creating an economic impact, the first thing we do is usually we look at it in two phases. If there's going to be a building built, we look at the capital expenditures. And then once we find out how much it's going to cost to renovate the building, we consider things such as putting furniture in the building, architects, IT equipment. And once we have all that information and the costs, we're able to identify the direct number of jobs created during this phase one construction phase. So that's one piece of the impact of Amazon. Then the second piece is the employment, the people that are actually employed at the operations. So we call that the phase two piece of it. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see the number of people expected to be employed. And we begin with about 400 people that are hired in 2019. And as we go through 2030, we see 25,000 people that are working at the Amazon headquarters when it's fully built out. So if we were to stop here, that would be an incomplete picture of Amazon's economic impact in Virginia. So to understand the true economic impact, we need to look at the purchases that Amazon will make, that the construction firms will make in building or remodeling the buildings. And we need to look at the sales that occur because people who are employed by Amazon are spending their money in the region. So it kind of looks like this. We've already talked about the direct impact from capital expenditures and from the ongoing operations. So we get some of that directly from Amazon and some of it from looking at the costs of construction and looking at the number of employees that would be needed for that construction. Then this next impact is the indirect economic impact. And that occurs when Amazon purchases items from firms in the region, such as supplies or other items such as consulting services. We identify this impact based on models that we have. And these models look at the different supply chains that industries have one with another, and as well as whether or not those industries exist in a particular region. So if Amazon were going to use consultants and there were no consultants in Arlington or Virginia, then that piece would leak out to another state. Then the next impact is called the induced impact, which is also called the household effect. And this occurs when employees at Amazon spend part of their income in the region. And since Amazon's paying a fairly high wage, $150,000 on average, and that doesn't even include benefits, so since they're paying such a high wage, the induced effect from this impact is a bit larger than we typically see when we're doing economic impacts. And then finally, the Amazon operations, construction, purchases from suppliers, and employment spending will create new tax revenues for the state. This tax revenue that we estimated, and you could see the full amount in the study, mainly comes from sales and income taxes that are collected by the state. So then when we add these three impacts, direct, indirect, induced, both construction and operation phases, we have the combined economic impact of Amazon in Virginia. And so here on this chart, I'm first showing you the spending impact, $210.7 million in 2019 as the construction and operations are just beginning. And as you can see, that ramps up to 2030, where we see $14.2 billion in 2030 when Amazon is fully up and running. Okay, now I've added employment, which is on the right axis, and you can see in the first year, Amazon construction and operations supports about 1,000 jobs in the state due to that direct, indirect, and induced impacts. That number increases through the years to a total of 59,308 jobs in 2030 that are either directly or indirectly supported by Amazon activities in 2030. And it's important to note that the benefits don't stop at 2030. That's just where we stop the chart. A similar level of impact will occur each year thereafter. Okay, this next slide now shows the estimated tax revenues that the Commonwealth will receive from Amazon's expansion into Northern Virginia. The blue section of the bars show the revenues from the direct impact in millions of dollars, and the orange area shows the tax revenue from the ripple effects of the indirect and induced impacts. So in 2019, the tax revenues are expected to be $3.48 million from the direct impact and an additional $1.88 million from the ripple impact, being the indirect and induced impacts. By the time we get to 2030, the direct impact translates into $223.9 million in tax revenues for the state and an additional $122.7 million from the ripple effects. And what's important, again, to realize on this chart is that tax revenue continues to occur each year beyond 2030 as Amazon continues its presence in the state. So to put this expansion into perspective, let's take a look at Arlington County. So based on the current mix of industries in Arlington County, Chmura's proprietary Jobs EQ software forecasts that the county will grow an average 1.2% a year in terms of employment through 2030. Now that's based on just the current mix of industries without Amazon. And that's a pretty good growth rate because in the nation, it's only expected to grow 0.7% in terms of employment. So 1.2%, pretty good for Arlington County. Now when we overlay the Amazon expansion, the growth rate increases to an average 2.2%. That's a full percentage point above what the rate would have been without Amazon there. And this is a conservative estimate because we only look at the direct impact. We're not looking at the indirect and induced effects of Amazon being in the region. In terms of wages, we estimate that the annual average wage in Arlington County will increase from about $91,500 in 2019 to $110,400 in 2030. Again, that's absent Amazon. But when you overlay Amazon with that $150,000 average wage, the average wage will rise to nearly $118,000 in 2030 for people employed in Arlington County. So in conclusion, Amazon will play a transforming role in the future of Virginia's economy. First of all, it's by far the largest job expansion into the state, and this is based on VEDP's data that goes back to 1990. And as you saw on the previous slide, it will boost employment growth in Arlington County by 1 full percentage point. Of course, it will have an impact in the overall state. Over the past year or so, we've seen our employment growing at about the national average. With the addition of Amazon, it's likely that we're going to start to grow faster than the national average, which should make Steve and Moray very happy. And most importantly of all of this, everyone in Virginia is going to benefit from the expansion of Amazon into the region. And Mark Vintner touched on this earlier, but one important thing is that it's going to diversify our state. We're very dependent on defense spending. In fact, DOD report shows that 8.5% of our GDP comes from defense spending, and that puts us as #1 in the nation in terms of being dependent on defense. So clearly, Amazon will help in terms of our diversity. And then finally, because of the increases in state revenue, all localities will benefit by seeing more funding in local education, higher education institutions, transportation infrastructure. So bottom line, in closing, I look forward to watching Amazon as it helps to transform the Virginia economy over the next couple of decades. Thank you.
Very exciting for those of you who want to follow the numbers more closely. When you leave lunch today, we will have a one-page information sheet for you and a frequently asked questions available for you. So on the way out of lunch today, feel free to pick these up. The whole study will be on our website at noon today, and I thank you so much for the work and the partnership. Chris, you did a great job on this. I also want to say, if you look at your program, you're having lunch right now. So we won't really have time for a break. We're going to stay on schedule, and we're going to leave this room, take everything with you, but look at your name tag. Your name tag will tell you what table number you're sitting in. So when we leave, take everything with you. We will begin lunch as soon as you can assemble downstairs. Thank you for coming to the morning program. We'll see you at lunch.